so it's Michael here, and this is episode 6 of the infantry system tutorial series. So in this particular episode, what I thought I would go over is how you can set up being able to use items from your infantry. So this is potentially something that might be handled a little bit differently depending on the sort of game that you're making, but in terms of the direction that we're going to go for this particular series, we're going to be setting up some functions inside the item objects that essentially contains some of the logic that we would have in regards to being able to use an item from the infantry itself. Obviously it's not something that every game needs, but in terms of the sort of core logic, it's something that can be sort of reused and repurposed in different places. So just as a quick reminder as to where we are in terms of the actual scene, we've got it where we've got some items that we can place down. When we open the infantry, we can select them either using the cursor or using the arrow keys. You will notice, however, there isn't actually a name up here as of yet, and the reason why is just because we don't actually have a name set for the infantry system. So I'm just going to give that a name of infantry. Now we'll quick double check to make sure that's okay. Yes, it is now displaying that name. So we'll quickly do it again. Yeah. Okay. So with that done, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a new item base that we can use specifically for items that are usable in a sense. So they have kind of like a function that the player can choose to use them. So if you remember when we first started, when we looked at the item data, we set up one called item primitive, which we use for essentially just the 4 primitive shapes that we have. So it's going to be pretty much the same sort of thing. So we're going to go ahead and, from the main item base itself, we're going to create a new child. And we're going to call this one item usable. And when it comes to the overall hierarchy of your items, sometimes it's just a case that you might need to sort of do a little bit of planning beforehand, kind of see the sort of items that you want and how you want them to function, and then kind of decide from there how it is you might want to structure them. But for this particular example, we're just going to use one called item usable. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is actually go ahead and create a function in here called use item. And I'm going to add an output to that. I'm just going to call that return value. And that's just going to denote whether or not it's been able to successfully use that particular item or not. So in terms of this particular class, I'm not really going to be putting anything else in there just yet. What I will do, however, I'm just going to create a folder just to pop the primitives in. Let's see if we have spelled it correctly. Just so those are out of the way. So now we've got this new item usable class, we can create children of that one as well. Now, what I'm going to do is something kind of like a, I don't know, like a health potion or something like that, something that heals something. So it's fairly simple in that standpoint. So we're going to go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to call this one item health potion. So we can open that up and we can look at setting some of these default values. I'm just going to make it the cone shaped primitive, and we'll give it a name. So health potion. Quantity 1, that's fine. Value, we're not using that at the moment, so we can leave that how it is. And then just do a quick save all. Now we do need to make sure that we have something in the level that we can pick up for it. I'm going to go ahead and select the health potion. And okay, we're just going to clear that. There we go. So now we do have the item in there. Okay, yeah, we'll leave it. Actually, we'll set the quantity to 4 for now, just so we've got a few. One other thing we probably want to do with the item usable class is actually go ahead and set that as a abstract class. That just prevents us from being able to create the object this item usable object itself, which in itself makes sense because without us setting all the other data, this particular class is useless essentially. So we kind of have to create children of it to be able to make them functional. So with that done, so it's abstract, we can go back to the health potion class. Now inside the health potion class, we can then override that specific function, which is the use item function, like so. Now at the moment, we don't currently have any way of calling this, so what I'm going to do for now is just add a quick print string in there. This is just going to be use item. Actually no, what I'll do print text. Just so I can actually print the name of the object. So for this, with the format text, I'm going to do use item, and then with the curly braces and close curly braces, we can have an input and get a reference to self. And if we plug that in, that should hopefully just return the name whenever this function gets called, just so we know that it's usable. Okay, so with that done, we can now move a little bit more on to the UI side of things. Now, again, depending on the sorts of thing that you're doing, there's kind of a few different ways that you can do sort of handle it. Now, at the moment, we only have a main infantry that we can sort of interact with as the player at the moment. So we don't currently we don't have to deal with having to sort of move items around or anything like that. So at the moment, there isn't any actions that we need to deal with. Now, if you're dealing with quite a simple, well, I say simple, kind of a restrictive kind of approach to some of your mechanics, where whilst as an infantry, it's quite limited in terms of what it is that the player can do. It's more of they pick up items and then they use them. You know, there isn't any containers or anything like that, chests that you can put items in. So you're only ever working from this particular infantry. Then there's quite a simplistic approach that we can go with, which is what I'm going to go for at the moment. As we build things up, we may obviously look at switching it and handling it slightly differently. But for now, if we open up the item entry widget, what we kind of need to do at this point is handle when this particular widget is clicked or kind of interacted with. Now, there are a few options for that. So, I'll click on mouse. Find the ones that we want. Yeah, so there's kind of a few. So if it's just purely based on a click, you can do the on key down. You can specify the specific key that you want the player to press. So for me, that's what I'm going to do in this particular instance. So what we can do from the in key event, we can get the actual key, and then we can check if that is equal to a specific value. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do not E. Yeah, we'll do it as E, but I will change the key that opens up the infantry, I think. Which I will quickly do now before I forget. So for opening the infantry, I'll change that to I. Now, if you remember from one of the previous episodes, for closing the infantry, that's handled inside the infantry main. So on the key down, so we do need to update the key in there as well. So I've just done that. So quickly check that's working yet. So press I. You can open and close using I. So that frees up the E key, so we can do something with that on the item entry. Now, just as a reminder, the on key down will only fire if the specific widget is in focus. Now, what we can do is, because we have access to the item object within the item entry widget, we can go ahead and call the use item. But you probably noticed that that function isn't there, and rightfully so. So the reason why is because the reference that we have here is just stored as the base item base. It's not the type that has that usable logic in it. So what we do have to do is do a cast. So cast to item usable. Now, for those that are worried about casting, obviously it's nothing to worry about per se. In this instance, what we're doing is we are referencing essentially an item base class, so there shouldn't be anything in here substantial that would ever need to be loaded. So with that done, if the cast fails, then we know it's not a usable item and we can just ignore what we're doing, and from here for the return value we're just going to mark that as unhandled. That means we've not done anything, and that just allows the specific input to bubble down through the rest of the focus chain so that other widgets get a chance to handle whatever the input was. Now, if it is usable, we can go ahead and call the use item function. Now, this is kind of where that return value is quite useful. So we can actually go ahead and do a branch there. And again, if it wasn't used, we'll just mark it as not being handled. If it was successfully used, we can mark that as handled, which again just allows the input to either be consumed or not further down the focus chain. So just with that in itself, if we have an item, if we pick up the health potion, we press E, you should see that it's attempting to use the item. So at this particular point, what it's doing is it's calling this particular logic inside the health potion. Now, for us to continue to the next stage, we kind of need a bit of a health system. Obviously we don't have one, so what I'm going to do is just set up a very quick health system inside the player character. It's not going to be anything particularly special, so if you do have your own health system or stat system as it were, you probably just want to hook up into that really. So I'm just going to place a variable inside the third person character. I'm just going to call this one health, and we'll do that as a type float. Again, depending on the sort of game that you're making, that might be an integer instead. Again, that's things that you can kind of tweak and change as you feel fit really. Now generally in terms of the health itself, we don't want anyone just to be able to just set it. Generally we want to make sure that it's always been handled by the character itself. So I'm going to go ahead and set that as private, and then we do also then need getter function, so get health, and that's just going to return the health, and then we're going to do another one called apply health damage. So we do want to set so we want that minus, and what I'm going to do is actually clamp. Actually no, not clamp, I'm going to absolute it. So that just means that if it's a negative value it will make it positive. And the reason why is because this is apply health damage, I kind of want to make it assume that it's always going to apply damage regardless of what number, whether it's a negative or positive number. Again, you've obviously got a lot of freedom in terms of how you actually set this up. As I mentioned, just a very quick kind of health system essentially. Now I do want to actually go ahead and clamp the results that we have. That's just to make sure it doesn't go below 0. but as a part of that we do then need a max value, so I'm going to promote that to a variable, and I'm just going to call this one max health. So, and we'll quickly set these, so we'll just do it as 100. Another thing we can do for the get health is we could actually get the health as a percentage as well. Just divide the health by the max health. We'll just do that as percentage. Just like that. So I've just set the default values here to 100 for both of them. That's kind of so we can kind of see it. And then because we don't have any UI for the health, I'm just going to print string that's going to print the health. Actually, no, we'll do a print text just so I can do the format. So format text. Like so. So whenever we then apply damage, that's what it's going to do. Now I'm just going to add some debug keys. So debug key, and I'm going to do numpad 1, and I'm just going to have it call that specific function, and it's going to do 5 damage each time. So we can quickly test that. So just a reminder, the debug keys, they are only applicable in a production build. So if you actually build for shipping, none of the debug keys will actually work. So these can be quite useful for testing stuff. So I'm just pressing 1 on the numpad, so it's calling that function and it's setting the health, it's lowering it, and then it'll clamp at 0. So we've got just a quick way just to reduce the health so we can see if the health potion is doing anything. Now, the next thing we need is a function for heal. So heal player. Again, it's probably going to be very similar to what we're doing in here. So I'm just going to copy it. The only difference is, instead of a minus, we want to actually add instead of taking away. Again, if you wanted to, you could set this up so it handles both of them together, where you don't abs the value, and you can just put a negative or a positive or a negative number in. It's completely up to you. I'm just going to put health healed. So whenever we heal, we can print what the new value is. So at this point, it's just a case of calling that specific heal function from the third person character from here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove this. So in terms of the parent class, we don't have anything in the parent function, so I'm just going to remove that. Right then, so at this point what we kind of need to do is get a reference to our character. Now this is the bit that's can be difficult sometimes when handling things through a U object, because particularly if you're using blueprints, obviously we've got no context of the world, so we can't just use get player character, for example. We don't have access to that function because it requires world context, so we kind of have to think of alternate ways to do that. Now I'm just going to quickly open up the base class again, just double check a few things. Okay, and then this, so add item object, just that. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do inside the item base itself, I am going to add a new variable called owning inventory, and that's going to be of the type inventory. So I just want to set that to the object reference there. And I do want to go ahead and I was thinking of possibly making that private, but actually, yeah, I'll set that as private for now, just because it does give us a little bit more control later. Now, what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to create a new function called set owning inventory, and in here that's where we kind of want to set the owner of the item, the inventory of the item. And in addition to that, not strictly necessary, but on owner updated, we can call that event dispatcher. Sometimes that can be useful if something's binding to it. Again, you might want to add some additional inputs on that particular event dispatcher. You might want to exclude it completely. It's completely up to you whether or not that's something that you might find useful. So with set owner, we've done that, and then we do also want to do a get owning inventory as well. Inventory. It's going to be another quite simple one, so we're just going to return that variable like so. Now what we need to do on the inventory system itself, inside the add item object function, so that's when we go to add the item. It's at that particular point that we can actually call the set owning inventory. So we add it to, in this case, the sets, and then we just set that to self like that. Now, just to kind of wrap things up in terms of the owning inventory, on the drop item, we also need to do something similar, but this time we would want to set it to null. So if we were able to successfully remove the item, we can then set the owning inventory, and we'll just leave that as null. So that kind of clears it. So that way, if it's in the world, it doesn't have an owner because it's not in an inventory. And I'm just sorting out the return nodes here, just so they kind of reflect what was there previously. Okay. I think that's just about it. So because we added the owning inventory to the item base, that will be present in every single item object that we create. So that includes the health potion. So what we can do is we can call the get owning inventory function, and I'm going to go ahead and set that to a pure function as well. So we can get the owning inventory. So this gets essentially this component here. So from that, we have quite a lot of flexibility in terms of getting the owner of that. So we can do get owner. And we know that the owner of that inventory in this case is going to be the third person character. Now, generally with doing things like stat systems and stuff like that, particularly if it's something that you require on NPCs and things, you may want to look at setting it up using an act component instead. So that way you could use the get component by class, and you could search for it that way. That gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of essentially these items being usable by NPCs as well. Because this is just a quick setup, we're not going to do that. We're just going to cast straight to the third person character. Just like so. And then we can call the heal player. Now for this particular health potion, we do need an amount. We're going to heal. So I've just promoted that to a variable, called it heal amount, and I'm going to go ahead and set that to 15. So in theory, every time this is an item's used, it should heal the player. So let's give that a quick try. So pick up the health potions. So I'll start by just applying some damage. Add to 40. So now if we press E with the item selected, health healed. So now that's going on. Now you'll notice at the moment, however, the quantity amount isn't going down. So that is something we need to handle as well. So what we can do in the use item, because we're in the item object itself, we can just modify the quantity. Now, yeah. That's out. Yeah, and that does update there. So if we quickly check that again. So it is attempting to do the heal, but let's check to see what the quantity is. Okay, well this is showing that we don't have any. Okay, so yeah, so it looks like it is updating the quantity value, but that's not yet updating within the actual UI itself. So that's something we need to address now. So as part of on the event construct, we update the text, and that's where we pull the quantity from here, and then we update the quantity amount. So ideally what we want to do, so on the item base, we do have a on quantity updated event dispatcher. So from here, what we can actually do is bind to that specific dispatcher. So I'm just going to do a quick validated get. So if that's valid, we can then bind to the on quantity updated. And when that is updated, we're going to go ahead and call a function. So we're just going to do the create event, and we're going to just create a matching function in this instance. And then from the update text, I'm actually just going to copy this end bit here and paste it in. So as a part of that event dispatcher, it does return the new quantity amount. So we just plug the new quantity amount in and just update the quantity like so. So if we check that again, so apply a bit of damage. Now if we try and use the item, the quantity now updates. As you probably noticed, however, we can go into negative numbers, which obviously isn't ideal. So there's a few additional things that we kind of need to address in terms of completing the item use, and that's if the quantity amount gets to 0, we actually want to remove the item object completely from the owning inventory. So if we go back to the health potion, obviously we modify the quantity, we then get the quantity. We can check if that is less than or equal to 0. So if that's false, we can just return true. If it is, then we need to remove it. So we can get the owning inventory. We do remove. Do we have the function for it yet? Possibly not. No, we don't. So we need to actually go ahead and set up a function inside the inventory that allows us to remove the specific item object. So inside the inventory system, we can come in, add a new function. We're just going to call that one remove item object. And for an input, that is going to be the item base. Like so. And then we'll just call the remove function like so. And for the inventory itself, we could also include an event dispatcher in there called on item removed. Object. Again, some of these event dispatchers you may or may not use. It's up to you whether or not you want to include them. But I do find that popping a few in places as you go along, you may end up finding uses for them at a later date anyway. Like I said, it's up to you whether or not that's something you want. So I've gone ahead and done that in there. So whenever we call the remove item object function, it will come through and it will call the on item removed. Now, because we do have that new function now, we can actually go through and potentially update a few additional things within the sort of drop item functions that we have. Now, ideally we could do with a return value on this as well, just so we know whether or not it was successful. So if it was there, it's true, and if it wasn't able to remove them, that's false. So here we actually have the option here where we attempt to remove the item object, and instead we can just call that function. So just swap that out, and that's going to handle that for us. And the great thing about it being inside the function is it then calls that event dispatcher as well. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, couldn't I just get items and remove it that way? And yes, you could, but generally I would try to avoid having it where the actual items variable itself is public. Generally I would try and set it to private, because you don't really want to have anything be able to just modify and clear the entire inventory. So having it where you can't get direct access to that generally is preferable. So let's quickly double check this. I've got the remove item, so that's going to come through and do its thing. Yep, and so now we can just call that function from the health potion again, so remove item object, and for this we can just call self. Just like so. Now in this particular instance I don't think there's anything else we need to check whether or not that whether or not the item's been removed in this specific instance. So even though we've done all that, the inventory itself, the UI, wouldn't have changed. It's not done anything. Now, and the reason why is because the item object has been removed from the inventory, but the UI hasn't been updated to reflect that. And because the widget itself has a reference to the specific item object, it will just continue to do exactly what it was doing. So if I was to close out and then reopen, the item's no longer there. So we do need to have a way of updating the UI to be aware that, hey, we've removed an object, an item object, do something. So there's kind of a few ways that we can kind of handle that as well. Now, we do have the item container, and this does some things in regards to initializing. So you could potentially do some stuff in here if you wanted to. I think what I'm going to do is just handle it inside the item entry widget itself. So because all we're doing is just adding it to a list, in theory all we need to do is just remove itself whenever it's removed from the inventory. So over here we have on the event construct where we bind to the on quantity updated. We can do the other ones on bind to, no, so we actually do it to the inventory, don't we? So 1 second, just need to think of the logistics flow of the orders of things. Okay. Right, okay. So what I'm going to do in this particular instance is I'm actually going to handle it inside the item container and effectively just rebuild the inventory. Sometimes this can be a good idea, sometimes it's not. So if you have quite a lot of items, definitely not a good idea. If it's only a couple of widgets, you're probably going to be perfectly fine. But I think what I'm going to do is kind of show you both methods really. So it's kind of your choice at that particular point. So over here we have the inventory that comes on in, and then if we do the bind, so on item removed, I'm actually going to do that before we populate with the item entries. Now create a new event dispatcher. I'm just going to create a matching function. So in this particular case, what we want to do is actually the item container box. We want to clear all children. Clear children. So that'll just remove all those widgets. So with that, so if we actually go ahead and test that now, what you should see happen is when the health potion is used up, it should just clear all of the inventory. So let's just quickly show that. So if we use the health potion, get to 0, they're all cleared. So it's not cleared the actual inventory itself, it's just removed all the widgets. So if we close and reopen, it rebuilds it, and you get to see all those items again. So what we can do, actually I'm just kind of thinking here actually. So yeah, so the inputs that we have to this container for the inventory is actually only for this function. Now we could store that as a reference somewhere, but that might not be the best of ideas. So instead what I'm going to do in this function here, instead of actually clearing the children, I'm going to get all children. So I'll get all the widgets, and then we can do a quick for each loop. Now we can do a cast to the item entry. Actually, we'll do a for each loop with break. That's so, and then we'll get the item object from the widget, so the reference that we've passed to it. And we can check to see if that's equal to the removed item. And if it is, we can remove that specific widget from its parent. And I'm just going to bring that down. That's so. And then once we've removed from parent, we can actually just break. So if there's any more entries within the list, it'll ignore them, which is perfectly fine because there shouldn't be multiple item entry widgets for the same item object. So that itself should actually work. So if we pick up a few things, and then we get to use the health potion, we get to 0, that specific entry's gone. Now, chances are if we've removed that specific widget, if it's in focus, we might need to refocus on the first item again. So I'll quickly show you what happened again, because you might have missed it. So if we go ahead and select the health potion, and then we get to use the item. Now at this particular point, no other item is selected, so it's removed it, but no other item currently has any focus. Now we can obviously use the arrows and select it. So ideally we kind of want to update that selection. So we can just go ahead and do focus first item again from the item container. So this is kind of just like a quick way to handle that. I'll just set it back to the top. So if we use those items, just select it back to the top again. Now, there are obviously ways you can handle that, where instead of just setting it back to the first one, you kind of keep track of where in the list it is, and it just finds the last one in that list. So it's kind of a few different ways you can do it. I guess we could possibly rework it here actually. So I'm going to rename this function to on item. Actually, item object removed. So what I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to promote the children to a variable. So promote to a local variable. We'll call on item entries. I'm going to use that for our loop. And then, so when we actually remove from parent, we're also going to remove the one from our local variable. But we do have this array index here. So what we can do, so instead of using the focus first item, we can get a copy. And we want to essentially get the array element that matches the array index we've got up here. However, if it's a case that we've finished using the last one on the list, it means the entries here is going to be one shorter than whatever that is. So what we can do instead is just get the last index, and we will set that to the max. Like so. And we can just focus that specific widget. And then we can return back up here. Right, so that should actually give us slightly more intuitive refocus after we've used the item. So we can do that. So it should select cylinder row 2. Well, cylinder with the 2 on it. Just like so. Let's mix things up a little bit, so we'll pick up the sphere first and then those. So that's slightly different order. So now if we go ahead and use all the health potions, it will select the cylinder again, so in this case the third one. So it's a bit more intuitive in terms of what's still selected. Now with what we've got here so far, particularly in terms of the focus, everything's pretty good. However, there may sometimes be an instance where the item entries is now empty. So we do want to actually quickly check to see if that's the case. So it is not empty. If it's not empty, then we can go and do that. So just want to make sure the false goes up to there as well, just so it breaks the loop. Yeah, so in those particular instances, if you've only got the one item and you use them all, it's not going to attempt to set focus to any of the widgets because there isn't any more to focus. So that's just a quick check on that side. So yeah, so I think that's probably where I'm going to call it today for this particular episode. So that's kind of a simplistic way of setting up a way to use items within the item objects, and how you can have that then update the UI based on that. So yeah, so if you found this video helpful, by all means do leave a like on the video. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I do have a Discord as well, so if it's a bit more of a complex problem that you've possibly experienced or questioned, by all means jump on there, ask away. I do have a sort of support section. Additionally as well, I do have a Ko-Fi page, so if you want to leave a donation, that is an option for you. Again, I just want to say I'm eternally grateful for all the support you all give me, and thanks for watching. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.